You can all hear me. Ladies and gentlemen, let us get started. Today we are hosting our conference. This is the fourth conference, and we, the organizers of the events, the Eurasian Center for Food Security, the World Bank, the FAO of the United Nations, and Research Institute of Floriculture and Subtropical Crops are happy to welcome you. We're happy to welcome all our participants, especially our foreign colleagues from neighboring countries, from the rest of the world. Today is December the 5th, and in many countries and organizations that deal with land resources, soils, there are various activities devoted to this topic. The activities are also held by international organizations, and in fact this World Soil Day to a large extent happened thanks to the input from Thailand and the FAO. In fact, we even got an invitation from Thailand to attend the event, but unfortunately we have our own event. And we also got an invitation from the United Nations, because the UN also hosts a series of activities linked to the World Soil Day. Now, we picked this topic for a purpose. Currently, the global community is well aware of the importance of soil and soil resources in the lives of humankind and in the functioning of the biosphere. In fact, from literature and from our own experience, we know that the situation with soil globally is far from being benign. And the topics for this year intend to mostly deal with erosion. Now, the sessions we're going to have today will deal with soil erosion mostly, because, as we know, erosion is a major threat. And we know that soils get destroyed very quickly. In fact, in no time. That is why this topic is currently extremely relevant. We would like to see how soils relate to food security. As of now, humankind gets its food mostly from agriculture. Some 90% of food supply comes from agriculture, from working soil. And this topic indeed is very relevant. And this is something that is addressed at different levels, both by the academic community and by society at large. Now, this year, this conference happens in the city of Sochi. This city is located in the subtropical area. In our country, this area is fairly small, yet very important. And I would like to concentrate this time on the tropical and subtropical soils' contribution to food security. The thing is that such regions are very special. We know that tropical areas may be very conducive to agriculture. Well, to some extent this is true, but also there are many issues out there, many problems. Soils may lack nutrients. Soil is very depleted, very poor. Degradation issue is rampant in many regions. So these are the kind of topics that we will be talking about today and tomorrow. Now, when addressing those issues, we always try to keep an eye on innovative technologies and new developments that allow to make best use of soil resources so that soil can stay productive. And we always try to see that our soils are used in full compliance with environmental standards and requirements, so that the entire soil use chain and all the technologies are indeed in line with state-of-the-art techniques. Only this helps us to obtain sufficient quantity of food of appropriate quality. I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to the Russian Research Institute of Floriculture and Subtropical Crops. We thank you for hosting this event. Thank you for taking care of us, and we'll enjoy your hospitality for 2 days. We'll stay in this wonderful room, and once again, I want to thank you, Mr. Rindin, in person for all your input and your willingness to host the event. With this, once again, I welcome all the participants of this conference, and I formally announce our conference open. With this, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Mikhail Sharafan, head of Department of Science and Technology at the Ministry of Science of the Krasnodar region, the region that hosts our events. Good morning, distinguished colleagues. Good morning, distinguished panelists. Indeed, this is a most important event, and it's a pleasure to be here today. You know, this event is very symbolic for our region. As Mr. Shaba mentioned, this is the 4th event of this time, but for the first time we in our region host this conference. And it's very nice to be able to host this conference in this building at this institute that marks 125 years of existence in 2019. Now, food security is related to natural resources, including soil, is perhaps one of the most relevant topics today. You know, food security is a huge priority for any country, and this country obviously is no exception. All of us are aware that at the national level in this country, we have a lot of national projects being implemented, and one of those is the so-called National Project Science. Now, this national project attaches tremendous attention to such area as the establishment of research and learning centers. Altogether, 25 such centers are to be established in the next few years, and this is what we are trying to achieve. We plan to set up such a center that would deal with agro-industrial issues and health maintenance. And obviously, food security is very relevant for this agenda. We are putting together a proposal to set up such a center. And in 2020, we will submit this proposal to the Federal Ministry of Science and Education for consideration. Now, our region, Krasnodar region, does a lot in terms of scientific research. For instance, our region is in top 5 Russian regions where fundamental science receives tremendous support. We're number 4 in terms of sheer volume of funding allocated to research. This year, we benefited from 120 million rubles in terms of support, of which 60 million came from the national budget, and the other half, the other 60 million, came from the regional budget. Only 3 Russian regions managed to outpace us, and these are Moscow and 2 regions of Siberia. Now, we started a new competition this year. The competition aims to involve school students in academic research. We develop mentors to get kids interested in research. And school students will engage in research in many areas, and they will be guided and mentored by our leading scientists. In fact, the staff of this institute also benefited from our grant aimed to support this program, and the school students of the city of Sochi will be able to participate in such research activities. In fact, the kids will be able to earn money already at school while engaging in various research projects. As far as I know, your institute deals with tea. Well, look, I'm happy to see that this event indeed addresses a whole range of cross-cutting issues. In other words, we have not only academics with us, but also people from the business community, people representing international organizations. The overall political and geopolitical situation is very precarious these days. On the one hand, we see a lot of globalization, we see some integration processes unfolding, yet there is also some tension. This is something we observe and feel every day. In terms of research, in terms of science, I should say that this is the area that helps diplomacy. This is a kind of area where we have always had links and interactions, and I'm deeply convinced that any area, any sector, and any success that we address or achieve serve to the benefit of all. So I'd like to wish us all exciting and rich agenda. I want you to interact, network to the full. This is a major communication venue where you can share your experience, you can listen to your colleagues, you can get familiarized with the research being done today in environmental protection field, in the area of soil science, and I wish you every success in the course of the coming 2 days. Thank you. Thanks a lot. With this, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Rindin, Director of the Russian Research Institute of Floriculture and Subtropical Crops. Good morning, distinguished colleagues. On behalf of the Vice President of the Russian Academy of Sciences, academician Irina Donik, and on behalf of the Agricultural Science section, to welcome you all, to welcome participants of the 4th International Food Security Conference, and I wish you a rich and rewarding experience. As Mr. Shoba mentioned, this conference will address subtropical area-related issues. Just a couple of words about our institute, the hosting organization. In fact, we were established in April of 1894 by decree of His Imperial Majesty Alexander III. Sample network of agricultural stations was established in two cities of the Russian Empire, Sukhum and Sochi. Indeed, we're 125 years old, and over this period, we addressed a lot of important areas, including industrial floriculture and subtropical agriculture. We worked in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, in the Russian Federation, and thanks to our scientists, we now are able to produce laurel, tea, oranges, heiwa, kiwi, and other crops. We are proud to report that thanks to our scientists, we're now able to see a new face of the city of Sochi. In fact, the plants that grow here are in fact introduced plants. And in fact, today it's impossible to visualize this resort city without palms, without orange trees. And again, as I said, those are introduced species. And now they feel pretty well. Now, our institute is a leading research and methodological center. We have two branches in the Republic of Adygea and in the Tuapse district of the Krasnodar region. We have labs and divisions that do research. They deal with subtropical southern fruit crops. There are labs that deal with flowers and fruits, soil science, physiology and biochemistry of plants. There is a lab on molecular and cell breeding. We have a vast scientific library. We have a plant protection division. We have arboretum. And one of the areas of our engagement is mobilization and preservation of genetic resources. The collection of genetic resources is indeed vast. We have over 2,500 samples of subtropical decorative fruit crops. One of the unique formats for the preservation of this collection is our arboretum and our friendship tree. This is something that you will experience during this event. You will see this friendship tree. It's a unique symbol of peace and friendship among all the peoples of all the countries. Indeed, it's a unique feature because it all started back in 1934 when Mr. Zorin started to graft orange species to this plant, and by now more than 600 grafting events happened, and the people from more than 120 countries participated in this exercise. And this is something we're going to tell you during your visit to our arboretum. Indeed, this year marked our anniversary, 125 years, and our friendship tree marked 75 years. the Ministry of Science and Education issued a decree whereby this institute will serve as the basis for a research center to deal with subtropical crops. We will become a branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Two institutions will be merged, that is our institute and the Sochi branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. We will deal with biology, land science, agriculture, social science, and we also deal with some cross-cutting research. In conclusion, I would like to express my confidence that this event will be a huge success, and this would allow you to cover a broad range of issues, establish new contacts for future cooperation. And look, we're always happy to welcome you at this institute. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks. With this, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the World Bank, Artavas Takopian, one of the organizers of this event. Over to you. Good morning, dear colleagues. I represent the Department of Agriculture, the so-called global practice of agriculture at the World Bank. I also work at the resident mission of the World Bank in Russia. Many of you may ask, why the World Bank? What the World Bank is doing at this conference? What does the World Bank have in common with soil and food security? Well, let me tell you very briefly what the World Bank is all about. The World Bank is an international development institution, and we've been working with the Russian Federation for more than 30 years. The bank is present globally, and we work with all governments. Our key objective at the global level is to support economic development, eradicate poverty, ensure even economic development, support economic growth, promote sustainable development, food security. So we're very much engaged in this food security agenda, including soils agenda. In fact, for more than 8 years, we have been working with the Eurasian Center for Food Security, which is represented by Mr. Sergei Shoba. The center was established at the Moscow State University, and in fact it was established upon the initiative of the head of the Russian government after the global food crisis in 2008 and 2009. The key objective of the ECFS is to help build research and analytical capacity in Eurasia and outside of the region to help achieve food security. The bank is proud to have been a partner of this center, and as I said, we've been together for more than 9 years. 4 years ago, we launched a major initiative. We started to celebrate the World Soil Day. In fact, 4 years ago, we emphasized not soil science per se as a fundamental science, but rather we focused on soil science as a cross-cutting topic that links together food security, agronomy, economy, and climate change, natural disasters mitigation. So we look at soil science, we see soil science as a broader topic, not just purely fundamental research. Now, what could serve as the best venue to address such cross-cutting topics? Topics that are very relevant for global development. Well, obviously, Russia appeared to be the best candidate. Prior to this conference, we held a brief meeting in Cape Town, in South Africa, where we, together with our colleagues from the ECFS and the Moscow State University, and from various African universities, we asked just one question to ourselves: what matters to food security? What might help ensure food security in Africa? Now, we did a focus group. In fact, we repeated this exercise. The first time we did this 4 years ago. And the question back then was quite relevant, and the answer back then and now was the same. People claimed that soil is the key factor contributing to food security. A few weeks ago, Nature's Sustainability magazine published an article dealing with the links between erosion and food security. And I will try to show you a map that was published by the magazine. And the map shows how erosion relates to food security. Now, countries that are hit by erosion are the countries that are also affected by climate change, by natural disasters, by hunger. And this is a kind of topic that we decided to pick for this event. In fact, the ECFS picked this topic. This is a most relevant topic, not just for soil scientists, but it is also relevant as a cross-cutting theme dealing with food security, economic development, climate change, and so on. Now, that was my preface. I gave you some background information, but now I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the representatives of the Krasnodar Regional Administration for all this support provided to this conference. I want to also thank the Institute of Floriculture and Subtropical Crops. Well, thank you for providing this wonderful facility to host the event. And I also would like to thank you. Thank you all for coming here, for your willingness to participate. Well, time flies, and the 2 days will end very soon, but I hope the meeting will be rich and rewarding. Thank you, Artavazd. And the last one to speak would be a colleague from the FAO of the United Nations, our colleagues, our counterparts. We have two, in fact, representatives from that organization, Mr. Harutyunyan, and representative of the headquarters, Mr. Yusing Tong. Please.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Again, good morning. My name is Kasyan Artyom. I'm from the Moscow office of FAO of the United Nations, and Sergei has already introduced to you the history of the World Soil Day. Sadly, this idea originates back in 2002 when the Global Soil Science Organization brought up that initiative, and that day, as Artavas has said, should not only be the festivity of the soil scientists, but something to promote the sustainable management of soils. 10 years after, in December 2013, the General Assembly of the United Nations announced the 5th of December following the initiative of the King of Thailand, the World Soil Day. We, FAO, celebrate that day for several years already, and I'm glad that the Russian Federation, starting from 2016, has associated itself with us, and we are cooperating with Timiryazov Academy, and we're not lagging behind our colleagues in Rome and in other countries. Let me thank all the organizers of that event, our hosts, the Institute of Floriculture and Subtropical Crops. Actually, it's a real pleasure to be with you in that cozy room, and we hope that this first step will be continued, will be followed in terms of cooperation between the Krasnodar Region Administration and others. We'd like to extend our gratitude to the World Bank and the Eurasian Center for Food Security and other partners. Thank you so much for making sure that everything is held at the top-notch level. Unlike Artavas, I will not justify why FAO and soil are interconnected. You know that FAO, since its setting up in 1945, actively works in terms of eradication of famine and poverty in the rural areas of the world. But also, it does a lot in order to preserve the natural resources for their sustainable use. And it is today I have to remember, sadly, about the SDGs, which all the countries of the world adopted back in 2015. One of the indicators of attaining the SDGs, the zero hunger, the goal number 2, this is about sustainable agriculture management, and the soil management plays a big role there. Also, I'm glad to note that the Russian Federation supports the Global Soil Partnership, and my colleague will tell you more about that partnership, which was set up back in 2011-2013, and this partnership, this alliance, spearheads these efforts to celebrate the World Soil Day in Rome. And with the support of the government of the Russian Federation 4 years ago, Konstantin Galinka Prize was established. This prize, this award, actually is conferred every day on December 5th, and this year this prize will be awarded in Rome. This is $15,000 as a grant and a gold medal granted to the pathbreakers of the soil science who contributed greatly to the sustainable development and sustainable soil management. And this is not by accident that this year the prize will be awarded to Chinese science from the Chinese Institute of Subtropical Crops, Professor Shubin Gambu. I do think that it will be another impetus for you. It will serve as a motivation for you, for the fellows, for the academics to continue your big scientific work which you are doing in that area. Once again, thank you so much. I'd like to thank all the co-organizers, and I'm passing the floor to my colleague, who will show several slides in order to introduce to you the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture and to the EB partnership.
Good morning, everyone, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, I just speak English. I need to learn some Russian, I think. Yeah. So it's my great honor today to represent IFAO Global Soil Partnership to attend this important meeting in Russia. And this year, the topic of this year was soil celebration is soil erosion. So the topic is soil erosion. And the soil is a basic prerequisite to meet the need of fiber, founder, food, and other productions. So also the soils could provide ecosystem services in the national, international, and globally. So soil have a lot of functions. And without soil, without life. Protect our soils, it means also toward the zero hunger of SDGs. Though it's very general concept, but when people asking what soil specific support our life, we can see a lot of functions from soils. Can deliver ecosystem that enable life on Earth. For example, nutrient cycling to holding soil biodiversity and also other functions. So if people asking, we can tell them there are a lot of functions for soils to support our life. And in 2015, Global Soil Partnership and the ITPS, Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, developed a very important report. So the studies of the world soil resources. And in this important report, the experts summarized 10 main threats to soils to sustainable soil management. And the number one is soil erosion. We need soils to protect soil. Without soil, we cannot protect soils. So naturally, there will be soil erosion. For example, when the rainfall, especially for the slope landscape, it naturally will happen, soil erosion. And also if there have wind, there have wind erosion. It's very natural. But our human being activities can accelerate the soil erosion by our improper activities. For example, intensive tillage or grazing, improper land use changes, construction activities. That's the problem, because our human being influence soils and make soil erosion. And by our activities, the soil erosion can up to 1,000 times. There are many patterns of soil erosion in this world. Unfortunately, 33% of Earth's soils are already degraded, and over 90% could become degraded by 2050. Our top soils are losing now. So the number one threat for soil is soil erosion. We need to do something for the soil erosion. There are many negative consequences from soil erosion, and the number one is the carbon emission from soil. During the procedure of soil erosion, soil get carbon estimates to the atmosphere, and in this way to change the climate change. And also, the soil erosion can influence the agriculture, have a negative influence on agriculture. For example, for crop production, 3.3% of annual global crop yield reduction per year is due to soil erosion, and equivalent to a total reduction of about 10% by 2050. Soil erosion also have negative influence on economy. For example, in European Union, every year soil erosion affects over 12 million hectares of land and 7.2% of total agricultural land, lead to 1.25 billion loss. So soil erosion influence also economy. There are also other indirect influence from soil erosion to our human being. Other negative influence such as the increased risk of landslides and flooding, increased risk of soil and water pollution, and the significant loss in soil biodiversity. We don't go to the detail, but you see there are a lot of negative from soil erosion. Let's see from the space. Our soil is losing globally. So a world being easy with no borders. Our global soil partnership have a lot of And we have 5 pillars. All those pillars relate to soil erosion to support decrease the soil erosion globally and with the policy and management. In this year, the topic of Global Soil Partnership is soil erosion. In May 2019, we organized a global symposium of soil erosion. From this symposium, we summarized many recommendations and published several publications, like the outcome document of Global Symposium on Soil Erosion and the report of soil erosion. I bring them today, but it's not enough, I think. So after the symposium, there are 3 key recommendations from the symposium. The experts summarized 3 key recommendations. The number 1 is soil erosion assessment tools and data, creation, consolidation, and harmonize. Firstly, we need to know the status of soil erosion globally, nationally, and regionally. Second one is policy and practice in action to address soil erosion. We know soil erosion, then we need actions. And number 3, the economic of soil erosion. A lot of experts during the symposium, they highlight the economic negative influence from soil erosion. Then we can raise measures globally to decrease soil erosion. People need to know the cost of soil erosion. That's very important. All those recommendations should be country-driven. For the implementation stage, all is due to the country. Countries move to protect soil, to decrease soil erosion. Those are our publications related to soil erosion, and it's not enough publication today I bring, so you can download from our website. There are Russian version of those publications. And thank you. It's my great honor to be here today, and soil erosion is the number 1 threat to soil. Without soil, we cannot protect soil. So let us stop soil erosion and save our future. I believe this will be a very successful conference and very important celebration globally. Today, there are more than 100 countries celebrate the World Soil Day together. And here I also want to thank the Russian Research Institutes of Floriculture and Subtropical Crops to organize this very important and very good conference. Thank you.
Огромное спасибо. Ну, дорогие коллеги, приветствие закончено. Я приглашаю в зал.
Welcoming part is over. Now let's get down to business. I want to invite here our panelists at the plenary session. Let's hear from our speakers. I suggest the following procedure. The first to speak would be Emil Fulachater, representing Soil and Water Management at the Crop Nutrition Section. Please. Now, I should stress that each speaker would have about 12 minutes for a presentation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Emil Fulajta. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Emil Fulajta. Originally, I'm from Slovakia, from Soil Science Research Institute, and I work at Atomic Agency about 3.5 years. We are in soil sections, and we run soil program to implement nuclear techniques in the soil and agriculture, and in this case, especially for climate-smart agriculture. Atomic Agency was created in 1957, seated in Vienna, and it is a new center of International Vienna Center since 1975. It is not really a research institution. It has main purpose is nuclear safety and nuclear energy, And apart of that, implementing of research activities is one of the smaller activity, but very, very important. The Department of Nuclear Science and Application has main topics: health, human health, physics and chemistry, environment and agriculture. Agricultural unit is joint FAO division, which was created in cooperation between IAA and FAO. This is the structure of our division. It has 5 sections: plant breeding, animal production, insect pest control, food and environment, and soil and water management and crop nutrition. This is our section. We have about 20 people, but there is a rotation policy, so we are always changing. The soil section is the soil program is divided to soil section and soil laboratory. Main activities are soil coordination research projects. Apart of that, we are doing technical cooperation projects in cooperation with technical department of IAA. We have research and development in our soil laboratory, some laboratory services, and finally, of course, publishing activities. The main our activity program is a soil coordinated research project. This activity is, in fact, the main purpose is to develop new techniques and to improve existing methods. The management is done by our program officers or project officers, like I am one of them, and we have some other colleagues. The cooperation is between developing countries and developed countries. Duration of project is 5 years. Budget can be from 300 to 600 in total, and this is divided for 5 years. The implementation tools are consultant meeting, which is first meeting, which is in fact formulating the project and developing the goals, the objectives. The research contracts are granted by 7,000 euro per year and attending of the meetings. Technical contracts by 10,000 euros per year, and meeting attendance and research agreements have no contribution to their research, but we are funding their attendance of the meetings. Normally, originally there have been 4 research coordination meetings during 5 years, but in last period we changed, and there are 3 meetings only per 5 years, and the soil laboratory is providing support. Technical cooperation has to disseminate nuclear technologies which have been developed by a coordination research project to member countries. The management is done especially from TC department by manager officers. We are only technical officers providing technical support in the soil section or other scientific sections, and they have either national or regional projects. Duration can be from 2, 3 to 4 years. Budget is very variable, depends on the topic of the project, but can be from 2,000 to 300,000, from 20,000 to 300,000 per year. Implementation tools, the main are expert missions. The expert is going to country, helping them with their work. Fellowships, the fellow is coming to learn somewhere the methods. Procurement, we provide equipment, this is very important. A lot of money are spent on them. Scientific visits are less important, subcontracts and other topics, other tools. Research and development is done by our laboratory, and this is very valuable. Laboratory is doing also services like some trainings or inter-comparison tests for the laboratories to check their accuracy and so on. And finally, we are publishing methodological handbooks, scientific papers, presenting on conferences, and awareness raising and dissemination. This is one of the example of our work, but it seems that the graph is here. Our work in the laboratory, they are developing new techniques how to use plutonium instead of cesium for erosion measurements. This is the overview of coordination research projects. There are not many, usually we have 4 to 6. Technical cooperation projects are much more numerous, there are usually about 50. The topics which we are dealing with is usually erosions, soil conservation, salinity, water scarcity, and drought management, food, fertilizers and crop nutrition. There are many topics which we can deal with. Greenhouse gases, there is big impact of agriculture for climate change, because agriculture is releasing a lot of greenhouse gases. Soil erosion is very important related topic to climate change. I will go very quickly through this because we don't have much time. And the water use efficiency, we have only 12% of the land used for agriculture, but we use 70% of water used by man is used for agriculture. The water efficiency is not very good. About 60% it's estimated that of water used in agriculture is used non-efficiently. So the nuclear techniques which we are using are based on several principles. We can use isotopes, neutrons or X-rays, and we use two groups of isotopes, stable isotopes and radionuclides. We use two approaches, observing existing processes in the nature or in the agroecosystems, and man-designed experiments that we, let's say, implement some labeling techniques. We are labeling fertilizers by nitrogen and 15, or we can use X-rays, and we can use artificially generated neutrons and so on. Sorry, this is the opposite. The principle of the isotopic techniques, we use two principles. Either we can compare two different isotopes of the same element, how they are entering into reactions, because one isotope which is more heavy has different affinity to to chemical reactions. So if, for example, carbon 12 and carbon 13 is entering into some reaction, in the new compounds, the ratios of the two isotopes will be different. This is very good tool to monitor all kind of different processes of the carbon cycle and many other elements in the nature. The second possibility is to compare amount of one isotope on different places. This is used for fallout radionuclides, for erosion studies, and we can monitor the processes of transport, so this physical process. And the next possibility is to use the energy of neutrons, either emitted by our devices or measured naturally existing neutrons. Neutrons can be used for measuring soil water. And then we can bombard elements by X-rays, and these elements are emitting some light, and we can in fact find some information about the composition of rocks and of the soil and so on. This is one good example. When we have hydrogen, we have with one proton only protium, with one neutron deuterium and two neutrons tritium. If we assume that the weight of the proton and neutron is the same, tritium is 3 times more heavy than protium, so of course its affinity to reactions will be very different. Similar it is, for example, for carbon, although here the difference is not so big. If you have carbon 12, 13 and 14, they have still a different affinity to reactions. Then we have a lot of different isotope stable, which we can use, or radioactive. The most commonly used are nitrogen 15, P32 is radionuclide, it is difficult to use, and C13, O18, and H2, so deuterium, for following processes of nitrogen cycle, carbon cycle, and water cycle in nature. N15 technique can, for example, distinguish of different emissions of NO2 from, let's say, organic matter from soil, from fertilizer, from plant tissues, and so on. Here we can see the typical quantities of N15, which are typical for different carbon. So organic carbon can have different values than nitrates, the mineral rocks, the nitrates from Chile, manure or other fertilizers. Atmospheric nitrogen is here. So in fact, we have different possibilities to fraction the processes and sources of particular. The same is for carbon with CO2 and CH4 emissions. Very important is working with O18 and deuterium for water cycle. There is also isotope hydrology. They use it in precipitation and in groundwaters. We have standard isotopic ratios, delta, which is ratio of isotopes in the different compounds. Sorry for I try to go very quickly because the time is limited. So when we have, for example, rainfalls, the evaporation, traveling of the clouds, rainfall, condensation, and rainfall, the isotopic composition is changing, and from this point of view, we can in fact trace the processes. We can use carbon 14 or tritium to trace the age of the groundwaters, and many other things can be done. In soil science, we are interested especially in infiltration and surface runoff. For that, we use soil moisture neutron probe, which is generating neutrons itself, and cosmic ray neutron sensor, which is measuring neutrons generated by cosmic rays. This is our team testing methods with backpack cosmic ray neutron sensor. The practical implementation is for different purposes. We can validate remote sensing information. We can use moisture data as an input for hydrological models. This can be further used for irrigation scheduling, for drought management, for flood forecast. Also, it can be used for tracing pollutants because we have different isotopes in pollutants like nitrates, phosphates, and other pollutants. We are usually plotting O18 over N15 or C13 in some compounds. For example, here is an example that we can plot O18 over N15, and then different nitrates coming from different surface sources can be distinguished according to their origin. This is very helpful to trace the sources of pollution in the landscape. These are the results of last new coordinated research project. The last nuclear techniques are the fallout radionuclides. Here I will not speak too much because as far as I know, tomorrow in the session on soil erosion, I will discuss this technique more in detail. We use two fallout radionuclides, cesium lead-210 and beryllium-7, and compound-specific stable isotopes ratio of C13. By this we can distinguish and measure soil erosion. and by this we can trace the sediment, the contribution from different land uses. If we have, let's say, cesium, it is fixed into the soil and it is only in the surface layer. If some soil is eroded, in this place where is erosion, the cesium is disappearing and here it is accumulating. Like this we can trace the erosion and calculate the erosion rates. And the CSSI, different crops have different delta cystatin signature. So when we have sediments in the lake or in the river or the water reservoir, we can distinguish by mixing models from which sources in the watershed this sediment is coming. Finally, we are publishing awareness raising papers on our website or in bulletins in other literature. We are producing handbooks or chapters to handbooks and scientific papers, review papers, and so on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Look, I think we do not have time for questions right now. And I suggest we move on with our presentations. Now let's hear from Pavel Krasilnikov, Deputy Director of the ECFS. Please, over to you.
Dear colleagues, first and foremost, I would like to congratulate you on that day, the World Soil Day. This is not only our professional day, although we look at that from that perspective. This is the day which is totally dedicated to the soil, which is the main prerequisite for everything alive on the earth. So this is the holiday for the mankind, and that's why it is being celebrated at the level of the United Nations. As far as you know, in 2015, the General Assembly of the United Nations decided to make it a World Day. Today we have two big topics at hand, proposed for your scientific discussion. And so they are connected to two things. First of all, this is about the soil erosion. This is the topic which was proposed by the Global Soil Partnership, GSP. And also we are focusing on the issues related to the CSA, Climate Smart Agriculture, and the role of soil in the climate change. So this is what I'm going to speak about. Where is the clicker? Here it is. As you know, the rise of temperature actually has been admitted even by the skeptics. Look at the mild winter which we are having here in the European part of Russia. We see the rise in the average temperatures, the number of the extreme temperatures, and by 2050 the maximum temperature in Moscow will rise by 5 degrees centigrade. So this is a very big figure. The average figures will showcase moderate growth, but the maximum, the extreme temperatures and extreme climate conditions actually would occur more and more frequently and would affect our life. And naturally, this concerns all of us. How can we respond to the challenges of the climate changes? Actually, we don't have many options. We have only two options, or a combination of two options. The first option is to somehow try to mitigate those climate changes, and the second option is to adapt for those changes which are taking place in that world. I remember the red books written by Mao Zedong said that if the wind blows, don't build shields to protect you from the wind, but build the windmills. So it means that we have to derive some use from the changes which are taking place. As concerns the mitigation of the greenhouse effect, certainly we have to admit that this is caused not solely by man. There are some cyclical processes pertinent to the Earth climate, so there are some ice ages and warming ages, and the rise in the temperatures which are taking place right now have been also promoted and boosted by the man-caused factors. This is something which we can address. In essence, what agriculture does about that and what the soil scientists do about that, I'd like to highlight two initiatives which were offered in the framework of the COPs of the United Nations Climate Change Initiative. 14 promiles. This was an initiative made by France. The foreign minister spoke at the COP, and he said that the French scientists did an investigation. They were instructed to do that, and they came to the conclusion that if the upper 40 centimeters of soil gets an increased content of organic carbon by 14 promiles, 1.4%, this is how we can offset and compensate the man-caused greenhouse emissions. I'd like to stress that this is not just an absolute figure, but relative to the reserves which the soil already contains. This is the initiative which was made, and it was received very warmly in the world. Actually, it is not far from being so optimistic, and it's not so simple to increase the carbon in soil. But generally speaking, it is not so difficult. For instance, we can introduce some fertilizers in order to increase the content of the carbon. And there is another initiative which is more important, proclaimed at the COP23. This initiative was expressed by Fiji and was supported by all the stakeholders. This initiative concerns all of the agriculture, how the agriculture may make its contribution to fixing the carbon, the right carbon management, the appropriate carbon-driven economy. C concerns about the increase of carbon content in soil fertility, especially as concerns the hayfields, pasture plowlands, and perennial plantations. And the second, the use of nutrients, the use of manure in order to set up efficient soil management. So this is about the soil management and the management of organic fertilizers. There is a number of other initiatives. I will not go into details. Let me mention just a couple of European initiatives. Smart Soil, the project which was supported by the 7th Framework Initiative, aimed at the improvement of the carbon management in the plowable lands and other types of lands. So the work to be done along with the farmers. And the second project, this is Circasa project, Horizon 2020 project aimed at implementing the initiative of 4 promiles. This program actually has to be totally scientifically justified, and this is an international consortium was set up to this end. Generally speaking, the main mechanism to fix extra carbon in the soil is the shift to the low-carbon technologies in agriculture. Out of practical things, this is about the zero initial processing of soil in order to reduce the greenhouse emissions, broad use of seed rates, the use of bean crops, pulses, the use of organic fertilizers, and the use of biochars as a state-of-the-art fertilizer. But this is not the only technology which we can use in order to reduce the greenhouse gases and to fix the carbon in soil. I will not go into details about that because the agenda is quite busy and we will deal with them later on. How to adapt for the climate change? How can we adapt for the climate change? All in all, there is a general concept of the CSA, the Climate Smart Agriculture, and it includes three components. The first component, this is about providing for the sustainable yield and efficiency of agriculture. We do believe that if the farmers are affluent, if they are rich, if they produce a lot, in that case, they cannot be scared by the climate change. Climate change can be scary if the agriculture is low marginal. Second, the adaptation for the climate change and adaptation of agricultural practices, improving of resilience, and also improvement of reclamation or irrigation, and also new crops and cultures to be nurtured, the ones which actually would be more adapted to the new climate conditions, and secondly, the reduction of greenhouse gases, sadly. How will soil react to that? What we soil scientists are interested in, what we can do, what we can predict. This is how the climate change may affect the soil. The mundane answer, grassroots answer would be like that climate change results in the degradation of soil. The soil degradation is about desertification, which is connected to the global climate change. So this answer is partially right, but this is not whole of the truth. We'll see that not always it is true. What degradation processes are related to the climate change? First of all, this is aridization, which results in desertification, which reduces the fertility of the soil, and it results in loss of humus, of vegetation. And this is one of the indicators which is being used in order to assess the desertification. And also, this is about salination and alkalization. And this is actually very typical of aridization. The reduction of biodiversity, the melting of solar flakes. And there is a big problem here in Russia that we see the melting of the permafrost. And it sounds good if we don't have permafrost. Similarly, it is good, but it may result in a disaster. It may result in a release of enormous amount of greenhouse gases. And secondly, we will see very negative processes and consequences resulting in the fall and collapse of soil and the surface. And secondly, aridization results in the loss of vegetation, which may result in wind and water-driven erosion. That's why climate change is always negative, but it is a mixed blessing. There are some positive changes for the soil once the temperatures are rising. For instance, for humid soils, we may see a whole number of opportunities created by the rise in temperatures, certain windows of opportunity for the development of agriculture, meaning that we see the increase in the microbiological biodiversity, we see the rise in the biological productivity. So it means that once we see denser vegetation, the soil would be prevented from erosion. Evapotranspiration increases, and therefore it results in less loss of nutrients, and actually the soil becomes less acid, and there are some positive effects for permafrost conditions. For a number of cold and northern territories, climate changes may open some windows of opportunity which we can grab. What challenges are there? First of all, the soil transformation. Once global changes take place, these results are not the same. For instance, in the warm climate conditions, it may result in the soil degradation, resulting in desertification, but in the northern conditions, we can use that in order to develop agriculture. And this is then when the soil scientists may apply their skills and knowledge, because this is how we can set up different models and simulations following our knowledge of certain soils and certain climate conditions. What will take place the day after tomorrow? What the long-term climate changes may result in? They will not result in the dramatic changes in the soil profiles. You don't have to think that instead of black soils, we will see something else, or instead of the podzol soils or ash clay soils, we'll have something else. But you don't have to expect that we will avoid some short-term processes such as salination, alkalination, loss of humus, denser soil, etc. So what challenges we are facing? First of all, we have to develop accurate forecasts how the soils may transform once the climate changes based on the paleogeographical and paleobiological data. So this research become of paramount importance and are quite applicable. We have to develop the methods of efficient fixing of carbon in the soil. So the initiative I spoke before. The assessment of carbon fixation as the soil carbonates during the aridization of the soil. So something which remains underdeveloped, but pidogene carbonates, this is another way the carbon may be released, and this phenomena is not being investigated fully, and certainly we have to work practically. We have to contribute to the low carbon technologies in agriculture. And the last but not least I would like to mention in my contribution is that carbon management, climate changes issues, and soil changes should be focused on by the Global Soil Partnership. Quite recently, back in October, we had a meeting of the Eurasian sub-regional partnership, which actually was timed to the meeting of the Black Soils Association meeting. It was held in Chisinau, and actually the main attention was paid to the black soils rich in humus. They are more fertile, but they are more difficult for management. And that's why we have to pay special attention to them. And we have to pay special attention to the tropical and subtropical soils. And this is what we're going to speak within those 2 days. That's why I will not deep dive into that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Next presentation will be delivered by Lizel Weiss-Rozanova.
Тема сохранения и секвестрации углеродов в почвах от локальных климатических оптимизированных практик, управления почвами до национальных действий.
Thank you, Professor Shoa. Good morning, everyone. I think my presentation follows very well on what Pavel just presented because it goes into a bit more detail in terms of climate-smart agriculture and carbon in the soil, protecting it and increasing it, and looking at how countries actually make commitments to international conventions to say that they will protect or increase soil carbon. So there are many studies. So there are many studies looking at how much carbon is actually in soils, how much can be protected, and how much can be increased. The absolute numbers are not important, but the principles of the proportions are. So for example, in agriculture, I'm focusing on agricultural soils. In agriculture, the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per year is between 5.2 and 5.8 gigatons. And it's estimated that between 38 and 86% of that can be removed and put back into the soil through carbon sequestration, through climate-smart agricultural practices. And looking at one study, for example, in all the data I'll try to highlight data for the Eurasian countries to show where they fall. So for example, Russia and Kazakhstan fall amongst the top 20 estimated with the highest potential to increase soil carbon per year. And you'll see that these countries are amongst the ones with the largest surface area and the largest agricultural area, which makes sense. But then it's also related to the starting carbon content, as Pavel also mentioned. But it's not only looking at the agricultural soils. There are also the high carbon soils, or the peatlands. There's also a lot of varying data about this. But it's estimated that if these peatlands are not protected, and they are often used for agricultural production because they are so fertile, it will lead to a loss of another 2,200 gigatons of carbon dioxide in the future, not per year, but it could be about 1.9 per year. Now, again, interesting for the Eurasian region is that both the previous data and this excludes the high carbon soils like the Chernozems and the Phaeozems and so on. So, depending on how you look at it, the potential could be even more. So, looking at more or less where the distribution of peatlands are, this is a map produced as part of the Global Peatland Initiative, and you'll see that the region in the north, the Eurasian region, has a lot of known areas with peatlands, and again, in terms of the amount of carbon stored in these peatlands, Russia ranks second and Belarus ranks 19. So two of the countries are again amongst the potential top 20. So what this tells us is that there are a number of countries that really have high potential to contribute to reducing carbon emissions and looking at climate change, mitigation and adaptation by managing the soils. And the nationally determined contributions gives countries the opportunity to set voluntary targets, so they are not compulsory, to the 2015 Paris Agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, to achieve the goal of not having an increase in temperature over 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius in the future. Now, an important point is the Paris Agreement wants countries to set goals as ambitious as possible in all sectors. We focused on agriculture, but they specify that developing countries should be supported in various ways to increase their ambition, to increase their capacity to prepare these ambitions, to communicate it and measure it. And we do see this actually in the contributions that exist already. And I find it very interesting that since October 2019, all 12 Eurasian countries actually ratified the Paris Agreement, and Russia and Kyrgyzstan were the most recent ones in the last months. 184 parties or countries have ratified by now. So we see the national nationally determined contributions as a good opportunity and a platform for countries to link and balance the national situation in terms of policy, technical capacity, and climate finance in terms of protecting and increasing soil carbon, specifically in agricultural soils, with the voluntary commitments that they make to achieve this. In other words, in the nationally determined contributions. So we did a study to look at to what extent the current nationally determined contributions actually include specific mention or targets for soil organic carbon, and also high carbon soils, peatlands, and climate smart low carbon practices. And we find that the picture looks anything between these two, where there might be a lot of national capacity and policy and so on, but it says there's nothing in the nationally determined contributions. Or the other side, where there might be mentions and targets, but they might be conditional, saying we would like to achieve this target, but we need financial or technical support. Or there might be a target, but there might not be the legal or policy framework to actually implement and reach the target. For example, stating that peatlands will be protected, but there's not necessarily legislation or mandate over private wetlands on privately owned land, so it's very difficult to implement the target. So briefly, from the 184 countries, only 10 mention in some way soil organic carbon and links it to a carbon reduction target, either an overall national target or a target for agriculture specifically, or a sub-target under agriculture, or even the example of Namibia, which is actually a really dry country, which has a very specific target for soil organic carbon of 0.18 megatons carbon dioxide per for I think 2030. And again, then another 3 countries mention soil carbon, but they don't link it to implementation in an actual target. So again, interestingly, of these 10 that actually have carbon linked to a target, Armenia is the one in Eurasia that is included in this group, with a broad cross-sectoral target of 2.7 tons carbon dioxide per hectare, and it just specifies that under land use and forestry, it will look at carbon storage in the soil. And in the next paragraph, it says it will ensure that organic carbon conservation, accumulation, and storage in all categories of lands. So in this case, we're assuming that this includes agricultural lands. So what we looked at next was that there is a lot of literature saying that a number of practices have been proven to protect or increase soil organic carbon. So we looked at to what extent these practices are listed in the nationally determined contributions to see whether it's necessary for countries to link and specify specific targets, or is it actually sufficient that the practices are stated and will be implemented. So on the one hand, if we look at erosion control, because that's one of the themes for today, there are 9 countries mentioning erosion under part of mitigation and 41 under adaptation, including Georgia and Moldova in Eurasia. Then there's grassland pasture management, with Azerbaijan having included in mitigation and Moldova under adaptation. And then in terms of wetlands and peatlands and re-wetting rehabilitation, Belarus has this included under their mitigation target, with, for example, wanting to rehabilitate 10,000 hectares of degraded bogs. And then we've got reduced or no tillage and conservation agriculture. I think it's not showing. They are in brown and in brackets because some studies say they do increase soil carbon, and some say it's very dependent on the climate and the local conditions and the practices and so on. So a lot of these practices are site-specific. So my last slide, what we are concluding from this is that this works in two ways. The one side is that the global community, the Climate Change Convention and the Paris Agreement want to track the commitments that countries make in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the other side is that this provides an opportunity for countries to set targets that they might not be able to achieve yet, but it could leverage the support that they need in terms of technical capacity, potential climate finance, but the transparency from the global point of view is very important. So 3 points to consider tomorrow in the 3 sessions, I think, is to identify the appropriate climate-smart soil management practices for the Eurasian region that would enable the protection or increase of soil organic carbon, and building the scientific basis for that, which would be necessary for monitoring. And then also including soil carbon measurement and monitoring in any implementation activities that relate to soil carbon, so that the database is built up, and also including soil carbon as a parameter in agriculture, climate smart agriculture related research linked to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you for a most exciting and rich presentation. We carry on. Let's hear from our next speaker. It is my pleasure to recognize our hosts. Madam Maliukova and Mr. Rindin. Distinguished colleagues, good morning. For the second time, we host World Soil Day related events. In 2015, we hosted International Congress of the Eurasian Soil Scientists Association. Now, this is becoming a very good tradition. Since the establishment of our institutes back in the late 19th century, we've been studying our climate, our soils. We wanted to introduce rare subtropic and fruit crops. Over the period of 125 years, we have introduced a lot of rare subtropical crops in the region. We introduced basic techniques and components of intensive tillage, and a number of research and academic schools developed over the period. Our land in land area, the subtropic area, is very limited due to geomorphological properties. The slopes very steep, and a lot of attention was given to rational use of such rare and limited soil resources, as well as maintaining fertility. However, intensive use of land and agriculture in the course of the last century resulted in erosion, acidization, changes in mechanical properties, and the ability of absorb various components and so on. Now, with the spread of urban areas, agricultural land area has also increased. But this resulted in a reduction of the crops we use. In fact, now only 4% of the entire land is used for agriculture. Horticulture is affected by unstable weather conditions, despite the washing regime. We have a lot of droughts and sometimes frosts happen in spring, and this, in fact, cuts productivity in half at least. Low permeability of soils results in water erosion, and dozens of thousands of tons of soil gets washed away. We've always paid a lot of attention to the rational use of the land on slopes. To this end, we developed a range of anti-erosion systems to keep the soil in situ. In fact, all the issues I have outlined caused the need to develop adaptive landscaping techniques with introduction of similar approaches given the land properties and crop properties. Here we help develop adaptive crops. We help locate the crop production in the best possible manner. Now, we try to make our crops resilient to a broad range of environmental factors. So we use our genetic material collections to address this. We employ molecular biology, biotechnology, and genomics to this end. Thanks to the presidential grants, we develop molecular and biochemical mechanisms that help increase resilience of tea to negative impacts. The same applies to persimmon and some other crops. We do a lot in terms of zoning of our territory for subtropical crops. We differentiate our area by agroclimatic conditions, taking into account landscape features, and we have identified 3 areas where subtropical crops could be best produced. The same applies for other fruit crops. Now, we can look at the soil properties, and based on this, we allocate specific segments for tea production. Productivity there may vary between 3 to 6 tons per hectare. The same zoning could be done for peaches and for melons. We try to ensure plant protection, and for this we seek new pesticides and new fertilizers that might produce better impacts with small quantities applied. Low nitrogen content and potassium content require the use of mineral fertilizers that impact productivity and boost fertility. We also used bioclimatic resources to this end, and we introduce environmental landscaping principles based on the classical biochemistry objectives, taking into account landscape features, looking at biogenic content. When we develop fertilizer systems for our orchards, we use a broad range of criteria, including biological potential, age, grade, geomorphology of soils, slopes, exposure, nutrients content, something that normally we take into account when calculating the dosage of fertilizers application. We also look at other soil conditions such as acidity of soils, which is very important for tea production. And this is something that can impact the efficiency of our tea farms. Since the area under agricultural production is fairly small, such approach can help minimize impacts on soil. We also develop descriptions for land plots that help take into account weather conditions, and this also allows us to better use our fertilizers. We do multi-year monitoring studies whereby we develop yield models for future years, and this also allows us to adjust our production due to poor weather conditions in spring and in winter. We also look at man-induced soil impacts when we deal with annual and perennial crops. We look at porous yams or puzzleized soils. We do soil diagnostics using a variety of criteria, including chemical and biological properties of soil. Overall, to ensure adequate nutrition content, we develop multi-component fertilizers that would fit well to our subtropical conditions. We use organic composts, products of aerobic composting, and local tree mulch, something that we plan to introduce on a broader scale. Over the recent years, many agro-systems of this city have become parts of the urban environment, and this also requires a change in our approaches. In order to address local environmental issues, we are to improve our zoning systems, and the key approaches here would be to introduce innovative techniques and new adaptive crops. Now, thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you successful work during this conference. Thank you so much, Ludmila. And now let us hear from Mr. Zavarzin, who is Deputy Director of the Vavilov Plant Genetic Resources Institute. Thank you very much. It's good that you mentioned that we are all Union Institute. In fact, we are all Russia Institute. Anyway, first off, I'd like to thank the organizers for their invitation to our institute, invitation to attend this event. In fact, plants is a link between food security and soils. Now, the location, the venue for this event is also symbolic. Back in 2004, it is here where we hosted our major event, and back in 1894, Applied Botanics Bureau was established in St. Petersburg in the same year when this institute was established. In fact, the names of our great predecessors link the two institutions together. And I'm extremely pleased to note that we keep our collaboration alive. And in fact, here we have a branch of our institute in the town of Adler. And those of you who will stay here through the afternoon of Saturday. Well, I invite you to visit our branch and to get a better understanding of what we do now. Let me get to the topic of my presentation: agrobiodiversity for smart agriculture in changing climates. I produced this presentation together with Elena Krostkina, my co-author. Okay. Just some major points related to food security. About 3/4 of global food depend on a fairly limited range of crops and 5 species of agricultural animals. Under the conditions of climate change, its dependency on a fairly limited number of crops does not contribute to resilience and security. Another piece of information I want to share with you is as follows. About 75% of the cultures that were present in the course of the history of humankind have been lost, are not used in agriculture. Now, this climate-smart agriculture is currently a most relevant topic, and here we can speak about boosting productivity and profitability of agriculture. We can speak about climate adaptation, and we should also strive to reduce the greenhouse gases emission. And this depends on what kind of crops we will be using and what kind of agricultural practices we will be employing. Now, the breeding exercise is ongoing for both animals and plant species. Climate change happens all the time, and we have to come up with new varieties, new species that could be produced under the changing environment. Now, the climate change also results in the change of pest outbreaks patterns. Besides, humans depend on plant products, not just for food purposes. And here I want to get back to the 75% of lost plant diversity. Well, this is not entirely true. Obviously, we have some hopes for the future thanks to the genetic materials banks. Over the past 100 years, such banks managed to preserve some varieties, and we keep expanding such collections. And again, Russia is in pretty good shape here, thanks to the genius of Mr. Vavilov. He was the first to engage in a systematic effort to collect samples of plants, both cultivated plants and wild plants. And currently, we have several thousands of samples in our collection for both cultivated plants and wild plants. We are a network institution. We have a number of branches located across the country, and we have a network of labs that study genetic materials. And they do this in various conditions, trying to understand how well the many varieties, the many species could adapt to the changing environments. Well, there are four key notions that I can use to describe our work. We modelize genetic resources, we preserve those genetic resources, we preserve them live. This applies to both cultivated plants and wild plants. We study and we do research, and this is something that I should emphasize perhaps. We study the behavior of the various plants and their varieties. In order to identify adaptive capabilities of those plants. And finally, we should speak about the use of the new varieties that are employed in agriculture. And hopefully we'll be able to move to climate-smart agriculture that would help adapt to climate change. Now, this is a map that demonstrates the sources of our samples for our collection. In fact, the map covers the entire planets. And the idea is to use our collection to fight both the negative consequences of climate change, but also to capitalize on some positive developments due to climate change. The key research areas are listed here. We look at genetic mechanisms that are at the core of specific properties. When and if we understand those principles, we will be able to speed up the breeding process, and we could target our breeding exercise. This would speed up our work, given the pace of the climate change and given the pace of the population increase. This is something we must achieve. Just a few examples of what we do at the moment. We look at target genes in order to improve properties of different plant varieties. We look at different allele versions to move southern crops to northern areas, and this may be very important for northern areas so that crops and their varieties could be easily and quickly introduced. Now, adaptation to different types of soils. This is another very important part because plants and soils interact along a variety of lines, including microbiomes. That's something that perhaps we'll talk about during our future panel sessions. Well, genomic approaches to improve the property of the resulting products. A lot depends on the environment where plants live. And activating or deactivating genomic sets may be defined by the environment where plants exist, including soil. And one other area I want to focus on is the need to identify pest and disease-resistant varieties. We know that one of the consequences of the climate change is the spread of phytopathogenic organisms, bacteria and viruses, and with rising intensity of agriculture, we are to identify lines and varieties that would be pest and disease resistant. Now, we have already learned a lot as to how to use genetic editing in order to identify necessary genes. We used our collection to deal, say, with cabbage and to make certain varieties resistant to specific diseases. We do field research. It identifies specific plants that are resistant, that are proven to be resistant, and then we use those plants to come up with a new variety. We identify genetic markers that relates to the parts of chromosomes responsible for specific property, and we use this for breeding purposes.
And this is applicable to the cabbage, and this was done by our colleagues from the genetic department. When within this diversity we may identify some pest and disease-resistant species which actually later on would be further improved. Certain work has been done to the collection. This is potato. This is what is called the second bread for most of the population of the world, and we include into the selection whether we can farm the types of potato which traditionally is not used in Russia, but which might be used in order to actually demonstrate the pest and viral diseases resistance. There is a number of other examples which I can draw, but linen, rye, where actually we have already learned how to work with the diversity of genes responsible for the resistance to different agents, disease agents, and to bring them into one crop, improving the properties and qualities. The same is true of barley and a number of other crops. And further work will be done in terms of domestication of genomes, meaning that we split the properties, separating actually negative and positive properties using certain tools. This is directed mutagenesis and CRISPR-Cas, and this is how we may actually split the properties into positive and negative, so that later on we could improve these properties. This is a number of work which we are doing in terms of biotic factors, in terms of soil, in terms of the climate change. This experience should and will be then translate into abiotic factors. And genome consists of the so-called silent factors, which are responsible for some genetic memory, responsible for the interaction with certain microbiological components of soil, which may help us to eventually improve the collection. And this is what I invite all the soil scientists to join me, to work with these genes and to actually use the microbic component of the soil and the genome in order to improve the isolation of the water, and therefore we can fix the carbon in the soil, and probably, I would like to stress that probably, we can actually fix the carbon in certain humine components of the soil. I was glad to speak in front of you, raising hope that we can expand our cooperation among the genetics and the soil scientists, so that we could identify certain rules and legitimacies which will help us to prevent the soil erosion and to develop and improve selection not only in Russia but everywhere abroad. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was a very interesting result. And the last keynote speech before the break will be delivered through Skype. I do not know how it will be organized.
У нас
Simon Leva, the coordinator from Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, speaking online with us. How much time do you need? How much time do we need in order to set up? While Simon is getting prepared, everything is ready. Okay.
Do you have my presentation? Do you have my presentation there?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Good morning, everyone. My name is Simon Leva. I'm the coordinator of the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture. Thank you so much for having me here. Are you doing translation or want me to carry on?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, good. So, like for just creating a bit of a background, the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, GACSA, was launched in 2014 in the New York Summit with more than 12 countries and 32 member organizations to join the missing dots between businesses, research institutions, NGOs, and governments, and create a platform to all work together to scale up climate smart agriculture. So when we started working, the idea that we found is that there was a lot of things happening in the agriculture, particularly facing the problems that have with climate change. And there are little places and platforms in which you can invite young researchers, businesses, and to talk all together. So constantly we have a problem that they're all in different spaces. Can I have the next slide? Are you moving the next slide? So where is yeah. So what happened is that the challenges that we all have is I will probably set up a bit of the what is climate smart agriculture. So climate smart agriculture, for those that don't know, is it's got 3 pillars. So adapt obviously to climate change, the adaptation part, mitigation where it's possible, the problems of climate change, and then create more sustainable farming and increase the productivity and income of farmers, particularly the challenges that we have for feeding the world in future. So next slide, please. So the objectives that we have in this platform is that it's a voluntary platform, so you join the platform and doesn't have any cost involved. Then what we try to do is to when you join the Alliance, we ask you to join the action groups, which are the engine of the Alliance. So the action groups have the knowledge action groups, in which we have basically universities and research institutions. And the idea we have there, for example, Wageningen University in Netherlands, we have Cornell University from America, and a list of universities from Spain, South America, Australia. And if then we have the concept of bringing our pilot projects to find a solution. So how we find the solution is by strengthening these projects with the action group. So with the knowledge action group, then we have the enabling environment action group, which is the action groups that strengthen the policies, and then the investment action group. So the idea is to have in this platform a place that they are like a broker that can join the missing links between, for example, a country that has got an amazing project wants to put it into action. They need researchers, or they need investors, or they need the policy part to be helped. This is what we help. And then the other objective that we have is to create like a hub of knowledge. So many times we find that obviously we can't find a solution that fits all. However, we find solutions that sometimes can be applicable in other countries. For example, there was a problem with adaptation. An example that in New Zealand they were growing mussels with the constant problems in the eye and water. And what happened? We have the same problem in Chile with the fishermen. They had the same problem in Chile. So what we did was to obviously put these two case studies and learn one from the other. Okay. So next slide, please. So when we talk about our value proposition, and that's slide number 5. So our value proposition is that we are all working together to have like one-stop shop. So for governments, do not double up efforts. For businesses, do not, and your research universities, do not get lost in this arena. Okay. So next slide. So how GAXA is composed, as I've explained to you before, we have a bureau of 10 high-level delegates, ministries from agriculture, from South America, from Africa, from Asia, research institutions like CICAS in there. Then we have some, the Assistant for the Director General from FAO is also there. And basically our high-level government is there. Then we elected 2 co-chairs, which in this case, we have 2 main figures that help the alliance to drive into the overarching sort of objectives and what is happening internationally. So this has helped for us on that. Then we have the heart of the alliance, which is the strategic committee. And the strategic committee is formed by the 3 action groups are called conveners, which are the key focal points that 3 action groups they have, plus the CSA community, which is could be donor countries and can be the more active members we have. And then the facilitation unit, in which I am the coordinator, and we are hosted by FAO here in Rome. So here in the Secretariat of GAXA, what we do is to provide support to all this structure. Okay? Then we have something very important that I would like to add here is the regional alliances. The regional alliances are an important part of GAXA because we have setting up a regional approach in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and we have also now in the Pacific community. So we have more than 8 regional alliances working on ground, because instead of having a top-down approach, we're trying to have a grassroots coming from the national level to the worldwide level. And what I also like to invite you all, if I can have the next slide, number 7, is to join the Alliance as a call to action. Particularly, please get in touch with us. You can go to the next slide, number 8. If you can visit our website and join as a member. Remember that you can't join the Alliance if you are an individual. You need to be an organization. And we are looking for partners in Russia. We are looking for people that is interested work in practice smart agriculture in Russia. And it would be good to create and get in contact with us because we still do not have a regional approach in Russia. So it would be good to have get in contact with universities, businesses, NGOs, civil society, and member of the government do they want to join and participate on this. So the next slide, that's my last slide, that's the link of the facilitation unit in FAO. And please get in contact with us if you have any question or we can help you further.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
Огромное спасибо
Good.
за презентацию. Thank you very much. Ну что, дорогие коллеги, у нас первая часть нашего рабочего дня подходит к концу. Я бы хотел перед
Уважаемые коллеги,
Distinguished colleagues, I suggest we get started. This is the last session of today. We intend to talk about the role of soil scientists in food security and SDGs achievement. Before we start, I'd like to make an announcement. On Saturday, we will have a study tour, a trip, and a colleague of ours will explain what kind of experience we're going to have. Please identify yourself. Who is going to describe this experience for us? Very briefly, Alexei, on Saturday, we're all invited to Adler station of Vavilov Institute. Dear colleagues, we introduced a brief change in our agenda. How about 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, or between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday? Why don't we go and have a look at our Vavilov Institute station in Adler? This is where we're going to talk about what we do. Both options are possible, both Russian and English.
Saturday at 9 o'clock. We'll be happy to welcome you there and to tell about activities which we are performing here. Еще раз, давайте сориентируемся сейчас на 9 утра.
So I suggest we tentatively schedule our trip for 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday.
We may have 9 for each.
Thank you very much for this announcement. I hope that everybody will be so eager to join this visit so that we will finish on time on Friday. Now, this session will be interactive. We're not going to show any slides or PPTs. We do not intend to have long speeches. In fact, I allot 2 minutes per person to speak. We will ask questions, and our colleagues will try to entertain those questions and answer those questions. The questions will deal with the role of soil scientists in food security, how we could make use of science so that it would help us ensure food security and reach the SDGs. Now, before we actually start our discussion, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. Pavel Krasilnikov, Deputy Head on Academic Issues at the Eurasian Center for Food Security at the Moscow State University, corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Ermek Baybagishev, the President of Soil Scientists Association of Mamytov, Association of Kyrgyzstan. Aziza Gafurova, Professor at the Mirza Ulugh National University of Uzbekistan. Diana Gasparyan, Director of the Soil Science Research Center, named after Petrosyan of the National Agricultural University of Armenia. Maxim Dabakhov, Professor, Nizhny Novgorod Agricultural Academy. And Patrick Nguzi, Senior Lecturer at the Makerere University, Uganda. Now, Pavel, why don't we start with you? What do you think is the link between soil science and food security? I know that we have been talking about this a lot, but in a nutshell, what kind of challenges do you see for soil scientists with respect to their possible engagements with food security, since food security today is the most relevant topic for global developments? Well, it seems to me that the most important thing is to understand that our civilization is an agrarian one. Whatever we produce, whatever we make with our own hands, be it industry or IT, it can only happen if we produce food, if we're able to feed the huge population living on this planet. We should understand that 95% of the food that we consume, to some extent, are dependent on soil. I'm referring to animal husbandry products or plant production products, the feeds that we use. They all come from soil, and only a small portion is provided by fishing, hunting, and gathering. Now, soil and soil quality directly relate to food security. If we lose soil, we're likely to face food crisis. Thank you. We have with us colleagues from my favorite countries, but 2 of those are my special favorites. And these are obviously Armenia. Well, strange, isn't it? And Kyrgyzstan, where I spend a lot of time. I've been working with Kyrgyzstan for several years now. Now, these 2 countries are really special. Kyrgyzstan sometimes is called the Switzerland of Central Asia. Well, Armenia sometimes it is also called Switzerland, but of the Southern Caucasus. Now, the 2 Switzerlands are different from the actual Switzerland because soil degradation is very prevalent in those 2 countries. Now, Guyana, how do you think we could incentivize agriculture? How can we incentivize farmers to employ techniques and approaches that might reduce the soil degradation in our countries, such as Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, mountainous countries. Please, over to you. Thank you for your question. Before I answer, I'd like to thank all the organizers of this conference. An extremely rich and exciting agenda, wonderful conditions. I want to congratulate us all on the occasion of the World Soil Day. Now, how can we incentivize farmers? In my country, land has been privatized, like in many other countries. And at a certain point, we had a joke. It's not that we provided land to farmers. In fact, farmers now received major headaches. Farmers started to employ new approaches. Previously, we didn't have any crop rotation. Land plots were very small, next to impossible to till properly. So agriculture was very obsolete, and that's why we suffered tremendous land erosion issues. And that was especially painful for Armenia, because in my country we don't have a lot of land that could be used for agricultural purposes. Now, I think we should indeed provide some incentives for farmers by expanding farms. I'm not talking about collective farms. I'm talking about large farms. I'm talking about establishing organizations where all small plot holders, small farmers, could get together and engage in collective operation. Land banks should be established, and such programs should incentivize farmers to work together and till land together. Obviously, science plays a major role here. We all should help farmers. We should provide extension services. We should provide advice. Soil scientists should engage with farmers directly. I think this is not a problem that is endemic to Armenia. I mean, we need young soil scientists. We experience a shortage of young scientists. And we have to address this somehow. And we have to reverse the trend. Thank you. Now, what do you think we should do in order to incentivize farmers to embrace technologies that would ensure preservation of soil fertility? Thank you, and congratulate you all colleagues on the occasion of the World Soil Day. Look, I do agree. We face a similar situation. After 1993, we privatized our agricultural land, arable land, and now we're engaged in small-scale production. Farmers cannot observe proper crop rotations. They use monocrops. Now, in order to incentivize farmers, I think we should demonstrate to them the benefits of the new approaches. You know, once people see some benefits, once people see the impact of proper crop rotations, once they see that application of fertilizers increases productivity, well, they would become really incentivized. Now, we are a mountainous country. We are mostly engaged in animal husbandry. And there is a certain mismatch in our agriculture. unfortunately, the prevalence of animal husbandry results in a lot of compaction of arable lands. And perhaps we should prevent this. Perhaps we should explain to farmers that they would be better off not using their land for grazing, but rather for producing forage. We passed a law on agricultural lands, but this is not enough. There are no regulations that would indicate which agencies, which bodies would be responsible for compliance monitoring. Well, I brought a copy of one publication with me. The publication deals with the soil assessment in terms of erosion. Very simple techniques are used to see whether soil gets compacted. We look at roots, and the root conditions indicate to the degree of compaction and so on. I think we should engage more in awareness building. We should get closer to farmers. We should not just try to teach them from a distance. We should work with them hand in glove. Thank you very much. Some very interesting ideas we've heard so far. If I try to summarize those ideas, perhaps I should say that one solution would be to ensure knowledge transfer. Two colleagues simultaneously suggested that knowledge transfer would be important in this respect. Now, let us hear from a colleague representing Agricultural University. What about this knowledge transfer? Why farmers do not know or do not have sufficient access to knowledge on land use? Thank you. Well, in fact, farmers do have access to the necessary knowledge. In fact, our tertiary education system provides sufficient access. However, there are some challenges here. And those challenges are not only related to the access, they have to do with other factors. In fact, soil quality is a cross-cutting issue. It should be attacked from different sides. Let's look at government support. Now, today, we see that the government is providing certain subsidies per hectare. And there are some eligibility conditions. If one of such conditions would be a requirement to maintain soil fertility and maintain the SOC content and the humus content, well, the farmers would be more incentivized. We experience a severe shortage of soil scientists. Only those regions that have sufficient academic capacity are able to produce enough soil scientists, and I'm referring to Moscow and Moscow region. Other regions find it hard to develop soil scientists. Besides, we still do not know exactly what kind of animal such soil scientist should be. We developed an educational standard for describing the occupation of a soil scientist, and this standard will be employed starting next year across the country. Universities will have to align their curricula to those federal educational standards, and I invite you to have a look at this standard and learn what's in there and how you will have to develop soil scientists going forward. Thank you. To summarize, you suggested that farmers have information, but perhaps they don't have resources, or the standards are not good enough for them to be applied. Well, would you agree with this, Patrick? You represent university in Uganda. Would you agree that farmers already know it all and they just don't have sufficient money to employ new techniques in order to fight land degradation and erosion?
Yeah, good afternoon, dear participants. I want to partly agree that our farmers could be having some information to respond to the challenges of soil management. Actually, in African setting, soil management is more of is a knowledge-based kind of intervention because if you are to manage the soils, you need the inputs, you need the skills, you need the different ideas from technical people. So I'm hesitant to say that if you are to intervene, information for the farmers is extremely important. If you are to intervene, you need this information. You need the inputs. Now in Africa, we don't have many times inputs. We don't have access to fertilizers. The area is, the soils are degraded. The conditions is worsening, but to respond to the challenge, we need a lot of inputs closer to the farmer. Now, the farmer needs to have access in order to respond to the challenge of soil fertility management. So I partly agree, the information is important, but also the inputs are important to be nearer to the farmer. If we are able to avail the necessary inputs, the seeds, the fertilizers, the different inputs closer, which is our challenge in Africa, and then you again skill the farmer with these inputs, then that integrated approach, both in skilling, in inputs, and in all the things closer, will improve the soil fertility challenge that we have at least for African systems.
Спасибо большое. Лазиза Гафурова.
What about you? Do farmers know it all? As colleagues suggested, they need just money to properly manage their land, or some knowledge transfer should also play a role. Thank you. A most pertinent question. Well, obviously, farmers cannot know it all. We don't know it all. And, we see new farmers, young farmers entering the market, and those guys have to be trained. We should expand access to innovations. And by the way, don't forget about women farmers. Sometimes they cannot get access to information. They may not know about certain training activities or capacity building events. It's a whole special separate topic. Now, given the food security issue, which is relevant globally, soil management has become a priority, not only for farmers but also for decision makers. And they engage in setting up capacity building activities, extension networks. IT is vastly employed to ensure such access. So I think all of us should continue our efforts trying to reach out to farmers, to build their capacity, to enhance their awareness. We should deliver what I may call the Farmers' Day, not just spending our time sitting in a room discussing the various exciting topics. We should go out to the field. We should talk to people. Besides, we scientists should work not only with farmers but also with decision makers. A lot depends on those people. A colleague of ours from China gave us a very interesting scheme. There should be a scientist that develops a certain technique or technology. There should be lawmakers developing necessary framework, and economy should also be at play. As long as natural resources, including land, are viewed as free good, people will be reluctant to take care of the land. We should identify the various costs and benefits related to the use of soil, how soil management techniques affect food security, affect human health. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Moldova attending an international conference on sustainable agriculture management. People from all over the world came. Ratan Lal addressed the conference, and he said that back in 1996, annual health cost per one person was about 200 euros, but by 2015 this amount doubled. And today we see that a lot of people are subject to allergic reactions, and young kids are getting sick. So this is something we should also be mindful of. Not only we should deal with farmers who produce, but also we should deal with people who consume. We should understand how the various practices and techniques affect human health. Now, if we give some voice to the various stakeholders, we should also include the end users, the consumers, into this equation. Thank you very much. You put a finger on a very interesting point. You said that we should be dealing with farmers, but let me get back to Patrick. At your university, what kind of experience do you have reaching out to farmers, working with farmers directly, especially with respect to soil science and agronomy? Do you have any projects or programs that would target farmers and would try to engage them in soil science?
Yes, thank you. In the African setting, actually, there are quite a lot of issues in the African farming systems. In Uganda, maybe I'll give reference to East Africa. There are very many issues related to soil fertility depletion over time. And for us who are soil scientists, we know that nutrient depletion has been ongoing, especially in our regions. Most of our data shows that nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they are negative nutrient balances in our region. And also in the soil scientist perspective, we have also noticed that even some communities have started migrating from one place to another looking for quality soils because they cannot be sustained with the poor conditions in some of the farms. But also we have realized that most people are running out from the villages, going to town, because the conditions of the soils are no longer sustaining agriculture. So many of them have run to the urban area to do border what we call motorcycle business. So the African setting has issues, especially in the context of soil fertility decline. And worsening the situation has been the issues of no fertilizer access. Actually, we are the lowest users of fertilizers in the whole world. So now this has serious implication on fertility, in food security, because now how are we going to produce for different communities when you cannot use some of these inputs like fertilizers that boost soil production, soil productivity? So we have had those challenges in reality down there in Africa, and it's affecting the general food security and the economic conditions of the farmers. And as Uganda and East Africa, there are programs that are there that have proved to be very promising in relation to food security. But also I had people talking about incentivizing or incentives for our farmers. They are real because recently there was a project by World Bank on sustainable land management, which somehow some of us didn't know that actually by doing some simple water capturing and optimizing nutrients, combining the two, you can triple yields of maize and beans with a simple technique which they are calling the permanent planting basin. Now, with this kind of intervention under such projects, we have seen such a simple technique being adopted by farmers very fast. And of course, the incentive is, if the technology works in soil management, water management, the incentive is very high when the technology works for our farmers. So some of those interventions in Africa are promising, and those programs are still needed to promote the soil management. As long as there is benefit, there is clear evidence that things work for higher yields, there is a lot of incentive. It's an incentive for farmers to do more soil management and produce more.
Максим Владимирович, вот вы
You raised such a problem, in which I would like to elaborate a little bit on. Back to you. I was keen to listen to what Patrick thinks. And in his intervention, he spoke about some very simple solutions which can change dramatically the agricultural practices, the practices of soil management. But you said that Russia lacks soil scientists. At least Russia has a shortage of soil scientists. Most of them are residing in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other big cities, and the rest of Russia has a shortage of soil scientists. But I'd like to trigger another discussion. Are we short of soil scientists, or the quality of knowledge, the quality of science has deteriorated? Fundamental problems are also quite important, but do the incumbent, the current soil scientists know anything about the real problems? Do they communicate to the farmers? Back to the simple solutions. So, practically speaking, there are no simple solutions. One solution would entail another solution, another solution. That's why I spoke about comprehensive approach. As for the quality of training of the soil scientists, on average, it is quite good, but it may differ. It would depend on different factors. It would depend on the funding of the universities and academia. It depends on how active the professors are in terms of bringing the students to the practical work. It would depend on how academic the knowledge is. Sometimes, actually, the classes would be purely academic. In other cases, it would be practice-driven. The quality of education certainly leaves something to be desired, and the professional standards I mentioned are about that. Pavel, what do you think about that? Yes, I think that we equalize the situation, and the situation in regions is very much different. Although I cannot agree with Maxim, who says that farmers know everything better than we do and they do not need any advice from us. Certainly they need counseling. 30 years ago, we started from different starting points. For instance, Africa had a colonial legacy, low level of education, and this continent overcomes these problems with success, with flying colors. But we started from a totally different starting point 30 years ago. The Soviet Union, with all its drawbacks and disadvantages, could boast one of the most well-educated population, and the senior age farmers are the ones who got at least vocational education, if not the higher education in terms of agriculture. But now, these are the youth who become farmers, who have no practical experience. This youth has no core education. They have no college or university degrees. And in Russia we hear lots of farmers who actually do the seeding planning, not following the recommendations on the plant protection and fertilizing, but rather using the moon phases. And then we run into the same problems. The extension service is important both for Russia, it is important for the former Soviet republics, it is important for Africa, Southeast Asia, and for Latin America. But this service should have its own peculiarities. Another thing is whether our specialists are ready to be efficient staff of that extension service, how we propagate the knowledge. Probably we do not train them well in that respect. Who are the graduates? Who are our graduates? It used to be either a person who goes to the soil and reclamation service or a department, the one who makes certain soil assessment maps, who can assess environmental problems or issues, who is capable of making some technical documents when designing and constructing something. For instance, once pipelines are being built. So this is being done. But in order to extend the knowledge, to propagate the knowledge, our graduates are totally unprepared for that. So this is one of the gaps which we have to fill. Thank you so much. Thank you for such an interesting discussion. Summing up the first round of our negotiation, I'll say that part of the answer to that problem is to change the type of the knowledge. It is about the knowledge transfer, to create a whole network of knowledge providers, centers, where the farmers could study. Let's proceed with the second round of negotiations. I have the following question. The first part of today was about the plenary session, the keynote session. And in the first part of our discussion, I didn't see any specific soil presentations. Even if you look at the titles of the presentations, it would be about the overview of the nuclear technologies for the CSA, food security of the soil and the future of the food security under global climate change, etc., etc. Generally speaking, all the titles have something to do with climate, have something to do with agriculture, with the business, but they are not purely soil-driven or soil-centric. Where do you see the role of the soil science in the age where the climate change become pivotal? How can science adapt for such a new wave of changes? And is the science adapted for that? Proceeding from the titles of the presentations which were made in the morning, do they replicate the curricula from the universities, and do we train necessary specialists? Can you tell us about Armenia? Your question is very interesting, because all over the world, for everyone, this question is of material importance. Right now, science and education have no niche specializations. At the moment, we are looking at the globalization of science, economy, and everything. Every specialty, every profession includes the management of that profession, because without management we cannot achieve anything. Just like any profession, soil scientist or soil science has to be able to calculate, to estimate. If we want to achieve everything, we have to be able to assess everything. It means we need management of everything. If we want soil science be tightly connected with the agriculture, we have to know how to calculate it and what to calculate. If we want the soil science to give good results in terms of addressing the climate change, what people cannot influence, still we have to be able to calculate, to assess. Whatever we want to achieve, part of the solution is about management. What we have to input in order to get favorable outcome. I do think that this is a common thing for Armenia, for other countries. This is my viewpoint. Thank you so much, Patrick. What about your training process? How you adapt for climate change, for the topics which are relevant today, in terms of your curriculum, your training programs? How do you train your students so that they could know all the knowledge which are relevant for today?
Thank you. Yes, we are doing some training. We have a master's program and a PhD program. And in the last 10 years, we also had a bachelor's program which teaches students agricultural land management. But the idea was to be a soil-based bachelor's program. So in the training, with the current trend of climate change and issues around the world, food security, environmental security, and other issues, the university is very keen about empowering students, especially in our country. We've been struggling with very few soil scientists. Actually, a recent study shows that about 2 to 10 per 1 million people are soil scientists. You find 2 to 10 in Africa, soil scientists in 1 million people, which is really a very poor number, extremely poor. In the whole country, you find that you have 10 soil scientists or 20 soil scientists. A whole country of 40 million people, you have about 40 soil scientists. That is really very sad. And of course, as the World Soils Day, I think we need to look into the future in terms of building capacity. Because now, if you look at the current challenges of our farmers, the reality is they cannot calculate some of these things unless a soil scientist sits down and calculates how much water, how much fertilizer, in which type of soil, for which type of crop, for which type of environment. This skill is completely lacking. Those who have been trained in other areas like plant agronomists or entomologists, they cannot do that. For me, I've seen it by my own experience. So what happens is, if we cannot be able to go scientific in terms of our curriculum, improving our curriculum, but also attracting more people to study soil science, then the world is going to continue struggling. Our people are going to continue struggling to do basic estimations. How much fertilizer? How much? What is the state of soil? How do I manage my crop? Basic things currently cannot be done because of the gap of the number of soil scientists. And even if we are to improve the curriculum towards the climate change and other issues, the fact is we need to open up more opportunities for people to study this course, these programs of soil science. We need to build good programs which attract more young people. We need to tailor our programs to the current demands, climate change, food security, and environmental health, so that a graduate is well built up to do practical engagement and provide solutions to our people.
Ermek, what can you tell us about Kyrgyzstan? Your curricula, are they adapted for the current challenges? What challenges do you see in terms of adapting for the new methods of thinking? Well, I cannot say that they are all adapted, but have separate showcases. There is more demand for the bigger number of soil scientists. 2019 was announced the year of the regional development and the country's digitalization. And therefore, we see some shortage of soil data. We are lacking the unified system, and therefore we came up with an initiative to set up a soil informational data system. Last year, with the support of the Eurasian Center for Food Security, Ms. Kolosov came to see us, and we collected certain data for the country, nationwide data about the soil condition. We tried to take stock of the types of soil, of their condition, because the National Statistics Committee also would like to see in which way the changes are going. If it is degradation, then they would like to know the humus content. They want to know where the country is faring. We are preparing the 4th national statement about the climate change. The 3 previous statements used satellite data, but now we need more accurate data, because over the last 20 years, a lot has changed, and therefore we have to update this data. And in order to update that information, we feel shortage of specialists, of experts. A question arises: the universities have to adapt their curricula for the external conditions. We are even discussing launching a new hybrid digitalized soil science. Soil science being combined with the digital technologies, IT technologies. Applications may increase the reach out to the farmers. There are a lot of opportunities to communicate to farmers. Applications are one of them. Aziza, floor is yours. Yes, with great pleasure. The National University, actually, in the Republic, has adopted a program to improve the quality of education, and lots has been done in that respect. And the National University is one of the oldest. It is 100 years old. And we act as the basic one. And we introduced a new course on the soil degradation. And we have a new subject, climate change and soil degradation, also resource-saving technologies of soil science, and innovative technologies to be used in soil science. Besides, we have an advanced training provided for the teachers and professors, and in the curriculum you may find similar subjects. In compliance with all the decrees, we invite foreign specialists and foreign professors, and I'm very proud saying that many colleagues from the Moscow State University and from the Agricultural Academy of Timiryazov, many colleagues from Nizhny Novgorod and many other academia, including the international universities, come to us. We are compensating their travel fees, and this is good for the students and for the professors as well. Besides, the weather forecasting service actually acts very well. Our region is very vulnerable to the climate change which is taking place in Asia. That's why we are focusing on these issues. We know that 90% of greenhouse gases emissions are provided by agriculture, ammonia, CO2, different acids. Brussels recently hosted a conference on nitrogen, where I made a pitch and I exemplified our experiments which we did in terms of the appropriate and right nitrogen management. And this is something which we try to bring to practice. We show to farmers what can be done. We also do some training to the students. 1 more minute, please. We adopted a concept of the climate smart agriculture. And before, some marginal approaches may result in some marginal results, and therefore will live a marginal life. And for instance, the rural areas with good soil, the people are affluent, so they have good cars and good buildings. Where the soil is poor, everything is poor. Therefore, we have to introduce the best practices. Smart technologies have to be taken advantage of. This is one of the solutions. Thank you so much. That was a very interesting list of subjects which are being taught in your university. This is something which I wanted to hear from you, Pavel. A simple question. It's not for you. If you act not as a Moscow State University professor, but I know that you make pitches at different international forums, conferences, you work with the Global Soil Partnership, and you also are a representative of the Eurasian Soil Center. What is the biggest gap? What is the biggest shortage which could be addressed by the soil science? How the soil science can help us addressing the food safety? Food security. Actually, following up the questions which were raised at the previous section, we know a lot, but we cannot do everything. In practice. So we keep training students. We teach them different skills. We have different subjects such as food security, and the soil degradation, sustainable development is being taught. But I'm afraid that we now have a new generation of students who are eloquent, who can speak using loud words, big words, but they have almost no practical skills of talking to farmers. But of paramount importance is that the soil scientists are not demanded for in the labor market. So they actually no longer are considered to be the advisors of the farmers, because sometimes they even cannot address specific problems. They cannot provide specific solutions. So it means that we do not have this connection between science education and practice, so that our graduates are totally prepared for the practical life in the real economy. Thank you so much. And for me, this is a nice bridge to ask a question to Maxim. I know that Maxim is a member of the working group which develops a standard of agrochemist, soil scientist, a new profession. This standard, does it include the practical issues which were raised by Pavel? Yes, these are the questions which are included into that standard. For instance, more focus is made on the practical skills. The situation has cropped out that soil science in the universities actually follows the traditional steps. A lot's been trained in terms of genetics, and actually the education is more of a theoretical, of an academic nature. But in practice, what we see, the students, the graduates, until now, do not know working with GIS technologies. They cannot use the mapping software such as AutoCAD or MapInfo. The students have very foggy impression of the meteorologic features and the lab equipment. So it means that the graduate will not put the appropriate task for the lab. Another thing, we have a very good legal field or framework for the soil and forest management. For instance, the environmental protection law, ending with methodological regulations on the calculation of the damage inflicted to the soil as the piece of environment. Some people, our graduates are not knowledgeable about all those documents, about all those laws and bylaws, and their decisions may result in million worth losses. Or, for instance, if they work for certain ministries, they cannot identify the violations. At the same time, they cannot defend themselves of some false or wrongful lawsuits when they are told that you are bringing manure to the, for instance, plowable lands, and according to the documents and regulations, manure is the waste of the third grade. So it means that the students have to be knowledgeable about the regulations, laws, and bylaws. So these are the things which we have included into the professional standards. Law scientists have to know all about that. Thank you so much, dear colleagues, for a very interesting discussion. We have just a couple of minutes left, but probably we'll give an opportunity to the audience to ask several questions from the floor or to make several comments. Dear colleagues, should I have any questions? Let's collect 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll give our colleagues the opportunity to answer them. Tell me, please, at the time there was a revolution in the soil science connected to Mr. Dokuchayev, who offered a new view of the soil, provided several provisions. Probably we can have a totally different look at the soil, proceeding from the genetic soil science to the practical soil science or functional soil science. Who can do that? Probably Patrick can do that, as most of the state art school. 2 more questions. I have a different question. What you are speaking about is totally true, but We all know that without ozone layer, we'll not have any life on the Earth. Without soil, there is no life on land. The reduction of humus or organic carbon is detrimental to the Earth. It's about suicide which we're committing. My question is as follows. Can we enshrine in the law, or probably enshrine in the Constitution, the idea of preserving the organic carbon or the soil humus fund as the national treasure of the country? It may bring very favorable results. Can we, proceeding from that, make the state, the government, bring that into law, enshrine that in the constitution of the country? For instance, in Russia, so we have a law about retaining of the soil fertility for the arable lands. And actually, this is the law which was signed was rubber stamped by Yeltsin, but it is not enforceable yet. Andrei Rozanov. Brief question to Maxim. The report which was ordered by the Eurasian Center for Food Security a year ago, which was prepared by Thomas and Karpish, stated that many Central Asian and Southern Caucasus republics have nothing about comparing the local experience with the international experience. So your curriculum, does it include the international experience of soil scientists and agrochemists? Because actually there is such a profession as the exploration worker. So a person may buy a drilling rig and make that a profession. Can a soil scientist work as a dentist, arrange its business and open its office for everyone? Thank you so much. That was a very interesting question. Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. Although I'd like to be quite critical about that, so let us get back to the role of the soil science in providing food security. I think that one of the main academic mistakes is about discussing something or someone which we are still missing in the room. For instance, we don't see farmers in the room. In order to discuss that, we need farmers in the room so that this discussion is more fruitful. Mainly, these are scientists who have gathered here. Speaking about that topic, we know a lot and we can do a lot in the area of soil science, and some adjacent subjects were areas of knowledge. Therefore, it's very interesting for me to be with you, because I know what areas of floriculture actually can be regarded in other areas of knowledge. What directions are to be developed in terms of priority as an interdisciplinary component, something related to the food security, bear in mind what is going on on the earth.
Thank you. The first question dealt with this new revolution having to do with the soil functions. Do we need a new Dokuchaev, or Dokuchaev revolution is still relevant? Who is going to take up this one? Pavel, how about you? I think Dokuchaev is still relevant, is still very much relevant. But that's an answer provided by an economist, not a soil scientist. Look, Ivan, I liked your tricky question. Look, thing is that I, for many years, have been lecturing on soil science history. And let me tell you something. The very idea that Dokuchaev came up with a paradigm where soil science is wrong, because it's not a paradigm. The paradigm that Dokuchaev used was the same paradigm that applies to ecology. This is about interrelations and interdependency of living nature and not living nature. So he worked within a framework of a broader paradigm. So this paradigm is still relevant. And functional soil science is a part of this paradigm. Of course, we can challenge the concept of the paradigm, but we can do this outside of this room. So we don't need any revolution as of now? Is that what you're saying? No. Okay. Was another question on soil organic carbon. Let me expand on this one. You talked about possible legislation being applied to the SOC, and making SOC a part of national wealth. Now, let me come up with a broader approach here. Let me rephrase the question. Since we talk about soil science, since we talk about SOC, do we need to deal within national boundaries, or we should be guided by environmental boundaries? Look, SOC is not governed by national boundaries. Look at the Changshan Ridge. The mountain ridge is shared by Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Everything is green on the Kazakh side, everything is brown on the Kyrgyz side. Do we have to expand our approach and forget about national boundaries when we try to attack such global issues? Look, you asked a most relevant and direct question. When we attempt to work within boundaries, national boundaries, we lose sight of many things. You know, soil science and agriculture in general is not something that can be kept within certain boundaries. Soil fertility is something that belongs to the entire humankind and not just to specific individuals or even specific countries. Now, if we use a narrow approach, both in terms of cooperation, in terms of science, we may be losing too much. However, if we employ a more global, a more comprehensive approach, well, we'll have to eliminate those boundaries. We have to look at fertility from the global standpoint. We have to come up with an all-embracing approach to reach our targets. Thank you. With your permission, just a couple of words to add. You know, the Secretariat of the Global Soil Partnership came up with a map describing SOC content in different countries, and they developed this global map across the planet. And it was interesting to see how national boundaries could be traced by this map. I mean, each country used its own technique, its own methodology. Precision of measurements also varied. And Luca cried, "Look, I spent 20 years of my life trying to eliminate boundaries, soil boundaries in Europe, and now I see those boundaries again." Well, this issue obviously is being addressed, and there are some efforts to ensure harmonization, but this only goes to prove how important this national aspect of dealing with soil is. Soil is, in fact, land. This is the most important component of self-identification of any human being. Look, this is my land. This works for a country too. Though this is our land. These are our boundaries. People died to protect the land because this land is used to grow the bread that we use. Having said that, we should not forget about international aspects. We talked about SOC and its role in the global carbon cycle. If soil gets degraded in a country, if carbon is emitted into the air, this is not a challenge for that specific country. This is a global challenge because life on this planet is determined by the SOC content. So that is why we should deal with both national and international agenda. And I'm happy to see that UNFCCC included soil into the list of its priorities. Thank you very much. Patrick, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add that true, we need to deal with the international component in terms of responding to environmental issues, and so organic matter is one of those, which is transboundary. But I just wanted to add that in our study that we did on soil organic carbon in Uganda, it is quite really challenging. And when somebody raised the issue of legalizing or putting legal instruments on soil organic matter, I think he has some serious points, especially at nationally based kind of approach. Because if you look at soil organic matter, of course, once you lose it, it is possible to restore, but it's really very, very expensive to restore any lost organic matter back to the soil. And for us in Uganda, somebody talked about peat soils, black soils. We have investors who are extracting these soils from our environment for fertilizer use. They are getting that black soil and combining it with mineral fertilizer to make a fertilizer, more complete fertilizer. But because there is no strong legal protection on our soils, the fact is we are really getting worried. Because once this soil organic matter is lost, I've been trying to do some estimations on how much organic materials you need, how much inputs you need to restore soil organic matter back to the soil. It is really, really very expensive and very challenging. So any legal instruments that can be either international or national, but which preserve this important parameter, I think it is a very important parameter. And of course, we know its integrated benefits on both climate change, on production, on environment. There are very many benefits, which we all know of maintaining SOC, soil organic carbon. So I think it is an area for focus, especially as soil scientists. It is an area we need to look at closely. And for me, I really, in Africa, where we are having soil fertility issues, I know. And today, we are talking about World Soils Day, where they are saying stop soil loss. We know, once you lose this soil, I don't know what next for some of our people if you lose all the soil. And if you lose organic matter, either through emission or disturbing the ecosystem or losing it in the atmosphere or whatever it is, it's very expensive really to restore it.
Спасибо. И последний вопрос о междисциплинарности. Я думаю, что мы обсуждали очень долго это во время второго раунда наших обсуждений, поэтому давайте с учетом времени мы его пропустим. Но вопрос о международном опыте. Довольно интересные вопросы. Я знаю, откуда Андрей исходит, когда он задал этот вопрос. Но вопрос в том, что учитывается, как бы вот та статья, которую наши коллеги написали.
The article produced by our colleagues last year suggested that, look, there was this post-Soviet, a sort of post-Soviet countries and the rest of the world. There should be some overlap, and if so, what kind of overlap is there? Now, to what extent the standards you are putting together employ international experience? Is the international experience reflected in your standards in terms of skills development, in terms of knowledge transfer? Well, it happens so that this country and our soil scientists tend to lag behind Western countries. I did mention that our students are not very well familiar with GIS technologies or applied programs, and this is something that is widely employed in the West. And we have to catch up. We are catching up. We're doing this pretty fast, and in some areas we're even leading the rest of the world. But our standards try to focus on those areas where we still are lagging behind, and this, to a large extent, is due to lack of infrastructure. As to theory, as to the academic part, we are good at this, and we're happy to challenge anyone on academic issues, on theory. Well, obviously, we can speak about different approaches to soil science. We have our own school of thought. There is this Western school of thought. You know, it would be useful for students to be exposed to other views, other approaches, especially since some of our students will have to be working in other countries in the future. Well, thank you very much, colleagues. We're well beyond our schedule. It's almost lunchtime. And we still have a poster session to accommodate, and we have to give a chance to our colleagues to present their posters to the Board of Audience. Now, today in Madrid, COP25 takes place, and today is the Day of Agriculture at the COP25. Our Senior Director on Agriculture at the World Bank just submitted a report for the COP25, and as strange as it may seem, COP25 is talking about the issues we addressed in the morning, that is climate-smart agriculture, that is soil organic carbon. This is about the introduction of new technologies for the benefit of farmers. So, distinguished colleagues, what I'm trying to say is that we are at the cutting edge. We are very much on par with the global agenda. And whatever we discuss today is also being discussed at the COP25. So my congratulations. And thank you all, our distinguished panelists, for all your input and contributions. Dear colleagues, before you leave the room, just some housekeeping announcements. I have a list of posters. I haven't looked at the posters myself. I will not read out this list to you. And I encourage you all to have a look at those posters. We have 20